All right, welcome back to the Canadian Gun Vault. My name is Mark Morelli. I'll be your host for this week's podcast, and I'm really sorry I don't have a guest here tonight, but this was the kind of subject that I wanted to talk about alone. I didn't want to drag poor Brian or anybody else into this with me. I was having a discussion tonight with a good friend of mine. For those of you that follow him on Instagram, his name is Canadian Gun Lover. Paul, great guy, younger than me. If I was, his age, I see a lot of myself in him. He's very young, and at the same time, terrifically enthusiastic, incredibly knowledgeable, has a fantastic eye with the camera. And if you're on the Instagram pages with us and you haven't checked out Canadian Gun Lover yet, like, you're missing out. This kid is dynamite. I mean, I'm loving what he's putting out there. He grew. I'll argue, I gave him a couple of bumps at the beginning, but then by the time I was like done, I think I'd given him about 4 or 5 bumps on Instagram. I decided that if I kept on bumping him, it wasn't going to be long before he overtook me, and I couldn't have that. I still want to be bigger than him. He grew so fast. He grew like 15,000 in like a month or something. Like, it's some crazy number. And I was like, holy cow, like, where's this kid going? He hit 5,000 in record time and just blew my socks off. Again, shameless plug, if you want to call it that. I want to see Canadian Gun Lover grow huge. Definitely my top pick, in the grand scheme of enormous number of people on Instagram that are incredibly talented. I mean, I could name off a dozen names in a heartbeat, but I'd be afraid that I'd miss one and somebody else would be upset. And so I'm not going to do that. So tonight, we're going to just talk about Paul for a little bit. Fantastic enthusiast. Definitely somebody that wants to see some change. I'm meeting more people like him every day. Younger people that have a real connection with their past and with history and with firearms, and an appreciation for the engineering and the advancements and the function of firearms. I'm meeting a lot of younger people that really seem to get it. And, certainly I don't want to see the older guys left out. If you don't spend a lot of time with the senior members of the firearm community, you are missing out. Not only are they some fantastic, characters, got a lot of interesting people in that grouping that will share their thoughts. At the drop of a hat, they'll tell you you're wrong. And I mean, they tend to rub people the wrong way because, they've been stomped on for a good portion of their life. I mean, they've survived a couple of big changes in law that I'm sure left, some bad flavors in their mouths. But anyway, moving right along, with the Las Vegas shooting happening, and certainly with the Canadian government making the unprecedented official announcement that there's going to be big changes at the end of the year, that they're going to make good on their promise. We got an advisory committee that nobody in their right mind would believe is impartial or objective in any way. Hot in the heels of this Las Vegas shooting and the announcement made by government, that something's going to happen. I got to tell you, I was raised by a politician, and he was a company executive at a very, very big steel factory and company in the 70s and 80s. But my father had become a political figure, and so I gained some insight as to how things work. And if I had to guess, it'd be just a guess. I made some speculative comments about the Las Vegas shooting. Certainly there was a lot of things that didn't seem to add up, in that, physical evidence that was left behind and the stories people were telling and the things that, didn't seem to add up. I spoke about this with my partner, Dave. He was in complete agreement. And quite frankly, he brought it to my attention that some things weren't looking right. Anyway, more news is filtering down the pike now, although I imagine it's only going to be what the media wants us to know. They are going to sensationalize whatever they can in order to sell papers. And, selling papers sometimes means, telling a good story. So don't believe everything you read. I'm certainly not going to suggest to you that anybody is covering anything up or start up any more tinfoil hat theories than are already floating around. But one thing I will say is this. Never let a good tragedy go unwasted. This government is going to come out swinging in some way, shape, or form. And when I say this government, I mean really, I got a bit of a problem with that. I think that at this stage, this government has screwed up so royally in so many different ways that they can't possibly take a chance with the gun community in a lot of ways. I think that, between 200,000 giant rubber floating ducks and, $10 billion payouts to, convicted terrorists and all kinds of, seemingly bad decisions being made, some ethical questions being completely sidestepped, nobody really doing anything about it. I mean, I don't know. I was kind of wishing I was in Parliament that day, because I think I would have called bullshit from the rafters and been thrown out of there in a heartbeat. I'm sure somebody out there would suggest that I had poor impulse control for doing it. But I mean, if you actually listen to what goes on in Parliament sessions, you might get a little frustrated if you're a normal human being, because I'm seeing decisions that seem to fly in the face of all reasoning, and yet we're all kind of standing on the sidelines going what the hell was that? I mean, at what point do you kind of look at your government and go, well, you're burying generations in debt, your giant rubber duck really, I don't know if generated any real talk or interest. I'm not sure what that was all about. Hydro rates are through the roof. The cost of living has never been higher where I am in certain respects, and yet nobody's really doing anything. And so, then you get the whole freedom of speech thing that is, I'm sure, going to erupt very shortly. There's a lot of people on both sides of that discussion. I mean, I barely want to even touch it. It's just so ugly, and you know what? When you're dealing with people that historically love to scream out the word racist, right now I don't even feel like touching that one. Because no matter what I say, I'm probably going to get accused of being a racist, even though I can tell you right now I'm not. There's this image in people's minds, I think, of firearm owners that needs to be dispelled, that we're a bunch of white redneck drunken idiots who are, bigots at heart. And I honestly, I just don't see that. I don't see it on the line. I don't see it in the community. I don't see it, really in any way, shape, or form. Certainly not with the new, fast-growing firearm community that I'm seeing. I'm seeing an enormous amount of diversity. I'm seeing people from all walks of life. And this is something I talked about with Paul, is that, we certainly have an image problem to combat. And, in the court of public opinion, we really do have to do what we can to dispel these myths. And by that, I mean, let's show them. Let's show them we're normal, rational, reasonable people that, enjoy, firearms the same way some people enjoy golf and fishing and, tennis or, collecting cards. I mean, some people make the mistake of, deciding that it's firearms, and no one firearm is any worse than the other. I mean, if you use it irresponsibly, I mean, you could put somebody's eye out with, a straw and a spitball. I mean, if you got bad intentions, you can hurt somebody. And then there's the whole argument that, why do you need them? Well, you know what? Then everybody starts talking about fast cars and, governors, and, the highway only does 100. You can't really drive a car, 250 kilometers an hour anywhere. So why would you want that too? But I mean, people do. People do, and they spend ridiculous amounts of money on it. And I mean, if the government swooped down and said suddenly that, you weren't allowed to drive your Mustang anymore, that it's banned, if I was a Mustang owner, I'd probably be sitting there saying, well, so what? I bought it. And if the government decided they were going to take your Mustang and or tell you could park it in your driveway and never drive it again, or better still, we'll cut your tank capacity to, 3 liters, so you can only get around the block before you got to refuel, you probably would raise a big stink, as a Mustang owner. But I think more importantly, I think that, Camaro owners, Corvette owners, and, everybody else should be a little concerned. Because, I mean, if they start with the, Mustang, I mean, how long is it going to be? And that's something I talked about with Paul, is they just chip away. Every 10 or 20 years, there's a government in power and or, people that want to see firearm ownership restricted to the point where people can't, breathe. And the difficulty I have with this is that you've got the legitimate firearm communities is restricted to an inch of its life already. And the rules are a mess. I mean, from a legal standpoint, they're just this jumbled, arbitrary, filled with ambiguity, mess of laws that don't make a lot of sense to the firearm community, and yet we still obey all of them. I mean, just a clear testament to how good we are in terms of, it's like listening to that crazy uncle, who tells you what to do. I mean, like you got to shake your head a little bit, but actually, who's crazy? You're actually doing it. So they've got this mess of rules and we're obeying them because that's what we do. We're law abiding. And yet they keep on changing them, and they're really not having any impact on crime. So at what point do you begin to scratch your head and say, well, every time you make a new batch, we lose a few more things and nothing really changes on the back end. So if crime isn't going to be impacted by this and only I am, you're just going to argue when something else goes wrong, a little ways down the road that, you should have made them more strict. How about we start, from a starting point? Why don't we start with laws that actually have an impact on crime? I mean, call me crazy, but I think that that's actually the purpose of doing it. So, to make this announcement and to have Ralph Goodell say, yep, we got something coming, and then to know that, the people that are supposed to be advising know nothing about guns and or don't like guns or closely tied to organizations that historically don't like guns and do their best to get rid of as many as they can. Why we're in this position, I don't understand. And I think that we definitely got to look to our lobby groups, like Tony Bernardo, the CCSA. We got to look to Tracy Wilson and Rod Giltaca, the CCFR. I'm not a lobbyist. I won't mislead people. I'll always say that I fight for firearm rights and I do it my way, but I'm not a lobbyist. I'm not a paid lobbyist. So if you've been giving your dues to the lobby groups, this is the point where, I think that we start to demand to know what action is being taken, because clearly the government is ready to make its move. They're testing. They want to engage our response. I get that. But as lobby groups, we've kind of been on the defensive for years. And every time we go on the defensive, what we end up doing is giving up a bit of ground. And what I've learned over the years, if you're going to get into a fight, and this is something my father taught me. If you're going to get into a fight, you don't walk right up to the person with your hands in your pockets. You might get away with that once, get socked in the mouth, and learn your lesson fast. If you're a slow learner, you might get dummied twice. But ultimately, if it happens again and again and again, eventually you walk up to that person, your hands are out of your pockets, and your fists are close to your face. Now, I'm not telling anybody to pick up a gun. I'm certainly not telling anybody to get violent. But what I will say is this. Going on the defense has historically not worked for us. So I think we need to start to look to our lobby group leaders and ask them what's being done to ensure that our rights are going to be maintained. And we should have some kind of answer. I think that's fair. If you pay dues, and you want to have some input, make the call, send the email, let them know. Members of Parliament, lobby group leaders, go to the heads of your gun clubs, ask. If you're listening to this podcast and you're, a fan of the page, if you're on Instagram, I really recommend that you get on Instagram. To a lesser degree, it's kind of mirrored in Facebook. If you watch the YouTube videos and you like what you're seeing, take it to your board of directors for your local gun club. Would love for them to understand what we're doing. I know that there may be, some conflict in terms of, thought process or politics. Although I've heard that about me, that people have mentioned that, that there's perhaps some sort of politics to the Canadian gun vault that they don't care for. The only politics that I have are that I don't like the government making arbitrary decisions that take away rights that I have and that relate to firearms unnecessarily, and certainly not with my tax dollars. And if it doesn't have an impact on crime, I'm not behind it. And I think that's something that anybody could write their member of parliament about and say, like, any legislation that doesn't have a direct impact on public safety is just an infringement on my rights and property. Like to potentially have your gun banned, or to restrict its use, or to enact new laws that really don't have an impact on crime and just make your life difficult. Anything that costs my tax dollars, I don't want that to happen. And I've been saying this for the last year and a half. So, contact your members of parliament. Contact Ralph Goodale's office. I've put it up in posts before. If you ever see Ralph's face on my Instagram page somewhere, if you go back enough in the posts, you'll find telephone numbers. I'm sure we're driving his call takers crazy, and I'm really sorry about that. I don't want to cause you any grief, but your boss keeps doing things that I just can't stand for. So every once in a while, I encourage some of my population to call in. Heaven forbid they should all call in at once. If he receives 60,000 phone calls, I imagine the bat phones would just blow up. Don't want to see that happen. So I would recommend that everybody call in when they have time. To make their thoughts known, and do it in a very composed way. I want to always maintain that everybody needs to be very composed, and formulate your thoughts carefully, and don't yell. Please don't yell. I don't want to see anybody get in any trouble, and I don't want to see anybody lose control and perhaps say something they regret. And just be aware that all the government conversations are recorded, and if you have those conversations, just be prepared to answer for anything that you say. So if you call in a controlled way and just say, look, I'm not happy, that's fine. Just don't get too rowdy. Anyway, my biggest concern in all of this, with Ralph Goodale making the announcement and the government making so many bad decisions lately, I think that what we can expect is for the RCMP, God bless them, the Mounties, to push something for the government. And it'll come in the form of, we're doing this for public safety, we've made the determination, and then the ruling government can wash its hands of the whatever poor decision they make. I mean, if they decide to further restrict magazine capacity somehow, or reclassify guns somehow, again, it's a shell game. To say that the SKS or an M305 can go be made to go full auto too easily. I'm going to argue that if these things are in the possession of people that have them, and they're registered, and these people have all been government approved, I don't know really what impact that'll have. You want to register some things that weren't registered before. You said you weren't going to bring back a long gun registry, but maybe what you're going to do is you're going to reclassify some guns and kind of bring it over piece by piece into the restricted fold of firearms. I mean, I could see them doing that. But whatever they do, they're going to do it through the RCMP, which is going to be a standard MO to avoid being called out on it. Because nobody really wants to mess with the Mounties, and certainly they're the the gatekeepers, or the keymasters, whatever you Ghostbusters reference you like. I could see them pushing some new legislation using the RCMP specifically, and I'm thinking it's going to be magazines and reclassifications. So, I mean, if you have a rifle that's non-restricted now, I think that it's probably a safe bet that they're going to try and push that into a restricted category of firearms, which means you're going to have to join a gun club and adhere to a whole new set of rules. That means it can't travel around the way you are used to taking it around. You'll have to have a slip of paper with you, and if you don't, you could potentially go to jail. Was the norm up until a few years ago, but then the conservative government changed that so that people wouldn't potentially get sent to jail for what was the equivalent of leaving your driver's license at home. Even if you did have a license, which is kind of ridiculous. I really don't know of any other activity that could potentially have you thrown in jail, or you could lose tens of thousands of dollars in equipment and in legal fees for neglecting to bring a piece of paper with you. I really don't know many free countries that enforce those kind of rules in that fashion. It's kind of draconian, but I think we as gun owners can expect reclassifications, some changes to the magazines, because the RCMP has always had this thing for making things go full auto. After it sits in a lab for 2 to 5 years. Like I would probably suggest that if you get any kid in a shop class with access to the internet, you could and some machining equipment, you could probably make just about anything go full auto right up until maybe a bolt action rifle, which, I understand they actually had one at some point. So like, where do you draw the line? If we've got good Canadian people that have been government approved, screened, trained and certified, and are, responsible historically, and have never broken any laws in their life and get checked on a daily basis. Like, I really don't know, if restricting that group further is going to make any difference. And if it's going to cost a lot of money, then I'm not going to get behind that. So pretty much anything that they throw down the pike is going to be garbage. And I think that raising a stink at our earliest, opportunity would be a good idea. So we're right back to talking to our lobby group leaders. Let's definitely see what kind of motion we can get from them. Anyway, I hope I haven't caused them too much trouble by doing this. It's just, I think strategically it's going to be the better move. Some of you may disagree with me. I know there's a large number of our population that seem to believe that hiding in the shadows is a good idea, and hoping that they don't come for them next is the correct approach to this problem. I don't agree with that. I'm going to strongly recommend and suggest that we get a little more proactive, and I think that that's something that my friends and family would agree upon, knowing the history behind all this. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this week's podcast, and as always, this is Mark Morelli, and it's been a terrific evening of great and exciting things happening. I can't wait to tell you all about it next week. I'm going to take a little break from podcasts and try and get a little filming done, and bring you some more great photography. If you guys want to send in anything, you've got your submissions. Send them into the Canadian Gun Vault at Canadian Gun Vault Inc. at gmail.com. God, it's been a long day. Anyway, thanks for listening, folks. Have a good night.